All right, let's take a journey. We're going to dive into the very foundation of biology, exploring the microscopic world that connects every single living thing on this planet, from the biggest whale all the way down to the tiniest little microbe.
So here's a question for you. What is the connection here? I mean, on the surface, a massive tree, a simple onion, and a person. We all seem completely different. But the answer that ties us all together is almost impossibly small, and yet it's the most important thing in the world.
You know, so many great scientific breakthroughs start not with a bang, but with a simple chance observation. And our story is no different. It takes us back more than 350 years, to something as ordinary as a piece of cork.
Now, figuring all this out wasn't a single eureka moment. It was more like a scientific relay race that spanned centuries. It kicked off in 1665 when Robert Hooke first saw these things he called cells. Then, Leeuwenhoek passed the baton when he found living cells swimming around in pond water. Later, Virchow came along and figured out that all cells have to come from other cells. Each discovery built on the last, piecing the puzzle together over time.
So this is it. This is what Robert Hooke saw through his microscope. It kind of looks like a honeycomb, right? This grid of tiny, empty compartments. He had no idea what they were for, but he was the very first person in history to ever lay eyes on them. So what do you call these little boxes? Hooke landed on the name cells, which comes from the Latin word cella, and it literally just means a little room. Honestly, it was the perfect description, and the name stuck.
And that little room? Well, it turned out to be the most important room in the entire house of biology. It is the basic, fundamental building block for every single organism we know of, from bacteria all the way up to us.
And the really cool thing is, you don't need a state-of-the-art lab to see this hidden world for yourself. The classic onion peel experiment shows just how easy it can be. All you need is a thin peel, a drop of water, a little stain to make things pop, and bam! You're looking at the fundamental units of life with your own eyes.
And really, that's the big takeaway here. It doesn't matter if you're looking at an onion or a human being, if you zoom in far enough, you're going to find cells. It is the central rule of biology. All life is built from these same basic parts.
But just because they're building blocks doesn't mean they're all identical, like a pile of Legos. Not at all. Check out the onion cells on the left. See how they're so neat and uniform, like bricks in a wall? Now look at the human cells on the right. It's a totally different story. You've got long, spindly nerve cells, round blood cells, stretchy muscle cells. Their shape is completely customized for the specific job they have to do.
Okay, so every cell is its own little room. But how does that room actually interact with the outside world? Well, it all happens right at the border, at a barrier that controls absolutely everything that goes in and out.
Controlling that flow is absolutely critical, and one of the key processes is called osmosis. This is all about how water moves. The cell's membrane is like a bouncer at a club. It's very selective about who it lets in. And for water, osmosis is just its natural tendency to move from a crowded area to a less crowded one, trying to balance things out. And this slide shows you exactly what happens. If you put a cell in what's called a hypotonic solution, basically a really watery environment, water rushes in and the cell swells up. But if you put it in a hypertonic, or really concentrated solution, water rushes out and the cell shrinks. The sweet spot is an isotonic solution, where everything's in balance and the cell is perfectly happy. And if you want a great real-world example, here it is. A de-shelled egg behaves just like a giant cell. You put it in pure water, it plumps right up. But stick it in a concentrated salt solution and it shrivels. That is osmosis in action, a principle that's at work in every cell in your body right now.
Now, while all cells share that outer border, what's happening on the inside can be organized in two very different ways. First, you've got your simple prokaryotes, like bacteria. They're small, and their DNA just kind of floats around inside. Then you have eukaryotes. That's us and plants and fungi, which are much larger and way more complex. We keep our DNA tucked away safely in a nucleus and have all these other specialized compartments called organelles.
So let's explore that complexity. A really great way to think about a eukaryotic cell is to picture it as a tiny, bustling city. And inside this city, you have all these specialized buildings and services, the organelles, and each one has a specific job to do to keep the whole city running.
First things first, every city needs a power plant, right? Well, in the cell, that job belongs to the mighty mitochondria. Their entire purpose is to generate energy. They take in nutrients and convert them into a molecule called ATP, which is basically the energy currency for the cell. Everything the cell does costs ATP. But here's the really wild part. Mitochondria have their own unique DNA. This suggests that billions of years ago, they were actually separate organisms that just moved into our ancestors' cells.
Now, any busy city generates a lot of trash, and that's where lysosomes come in. You can think of them as the cell's official cleanup crew and recycling center.
These things are basically little sacs filled with powerful digestive enzymes. They roam around, dissolving any foreign invaders like bacteria, and they also break down old, worn-out cell parts so the materials can be reused. They keep the whole city clean and running efficiently.
And of course, every city needs infrastructure. It needs factories to make things and highways to move them around. In the cell, that's the endoplasmic reticulum, or just the ER for short.
This thing is a huge winding network of tubes and membranes. The rough ER part is studded with tiny factories called ribosomes, and that's where proteins get made. The smooth ER is where the cell manufactures fats, and the entire network doubles as a cellular highway system, transporting all these vital materials wherever they need to go.
And this brings us right back to the main idea, and this quote just says it all perfectly. The cell isn't just a structural brick, it's a living, working thing. It is both the architecture and the occupant of the entire building of life.
So I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've defined the cell by all its complex, living machinery, all wrapped up inside a membrane. But then there are viruses. They don't have any of that. A virus is just some genetic code wrapped in a protein shell.